Are you biting your nails at the end of every quarter, waiting for deals to come in? It's not enough for the prospect to say yes. You have to manage the closing process effectively. This video will show you how. Let's talk about what we want to accomplish with our closing process. So here's where a lot of you are right now. Your kind of process of closing the deal after a prospect has said yes. It's often delayed due to surprises, like new action items come out of nowhere, or there's friction. It just seems like the gears are kind of grinding to a halt. What I want to do in this video is get you to a closing process that is predictable and efficient. I want to make sure your team is organized and that you are using all of the various kind of vectors of influence that you have to make that closing process efficient. So probably the most important tool that you're going to use is an internal close plan. And what I mean by that is that somewhere around the start of month 2 of the quarter, your team should sit down and sketch out in writing the steps that are going to get all of their deals closed by the end of that quarter. So think about a goal close date that you're going to work backwards from, right? Often that's the end of the quarter. Give yourself a little bit of a buffer, right? An extra week or two, because there's always something that takes a little bit longer than you expect. And then map out the steps that you think will be involved in getting that deal closed. Now, as soon as you can, you want to actually go ahead and kind of co-create a joint close plan with your champion on the buyer's side. And you definitely want to do this no later than the time that you are delivering the proposal. Ideally earlier, but definitely no later than that. And the idea here is you want to avoid any kind of surprises. So get all of the action items on the table and ask how long each step is going to take. Don't make any assumptions here, right? That you might think that it takes about an hour to get a contract signed after everything's approved. Well, for some companies, it actually takes a week. So ask for every step in that close plan. And the goal is to make sure that you're operating along parallel workflows. In other words, you are working on all of the open projects to get that deal closed at the same time. So here's what you don't want. What you don't want is a situation where you have staggered workflows because you're getting surprised by additional steps. So this is a scenario that happens all the time. So it's week 1, right? The prospect has said yes, and you're now in week 1 of the closing process. And so you go ahead and you share the contract. Things are going along well. You're in week 2. You're trading some red lines back and forth on that contract. Week 3 comes around and you have a legal call between the two legal teams to talk through the open items. And that a call's going well. You're getting all the issues resolved. And then lo and behold, you find out that you also need to do a security questionnaire, right? You didn't know about this before, so you weren't making any progress on it in week 1 or in week 2. And now instead of being ready to sign a contract, you've got to deal with this security questionnaire. So in week 4, that contract is on hold. And lo and behold, your security team tells you that before they can share that questionnaire, they've got to get an NDA signed. So that's a whole other legal process to get completed. Week 5, you're on hold with the contract, and you've got to have a security call to get those remaining security issues kind of ironed out. And in week 6, finally you get approval on the security review, and you can sign the contract. Ouch, right? The core problem here is that we didn't spot the security review for 2 weeks. And that led to a 2-week delay in closing the deal. And that could easily cause the deal to get pushed out of the quarter. Scenarios like this happen all the time with some additional action item that kind of comes up out of nowhere and then has its own process. And really, like this just it shouldn't happen. So what you want is a situation with parallel workflows where you're spotting everything at the beginning and working on all of the action items all at the same time in parallel. So we're going to start this process now at the time that we're delivering the proposal. In other words, they haven't even said yes yet, but we're already starting to really dig in on the planning. So we have a planning call with our champion, right? That's the kind of mid-level manager who's helping us coordinate the process and is really advocating for it. And then on the security side, we have a pretty good idea that we'll probably need an NDA in place at some point. So we're not going to wait. We're going to share our NDA right now so they can get started on it. And then they go ahead and say yes. So we enter week one of the closing process, right? We share our contract and we're able to get started on that questionnaire right away because we've already got the NDA in place. We're in week two. We're trucking away on the red lines. We're already doing our security call because we are already underway. Week three, we've got our legal call and we've got our approval on security, which is fantastic. Week four comes around. We've actually got a buffer week on security, right? Which is fantastic. And we can sign our contract in week four. So the core here is that we got all the tasks on the table once that proposal was shared. And that allowed us to get that close in 2 weeks sooner, which is fantastic. One hidden pitfall to be aware of is that sometimes prospects will say yes, but that it doesn't really mean that they've truly decided to purchase the product. So one of my early sales managers had a saying. He used to say, "I am a verbal billionaire." And what he meant by that was that if he had gotten paid commission every time a prospect said yes, he would have $1 billion worth of commission payments. And the point he was making was that it's often the case that a prospect says yes, but that deal doesn't happen for some reason. So you want to train your team to stress test any situation where the prospect says yes to find out if it's real or if there's still something missing that we need to work on. So for example, let's find out. Let's say our champion says yes, we want to do it. Well, does that mean that the business decision maker gave their final approval, right? The VP, not the manager that we're talking to. Has the budget finally been approved, right? Did the CFO allocate funds? And do we know what configuration they've said yes to? And this is really important because sometimes they will be saying yes in general, but in fact they're not really ready to say yes to any of the actual options that we've proposed. So definitely train your team to stress test on all of these points. Now, one of the big challenges when you're kind of working your close plan is this idea of kind of creating and driving urgency. And the core problem here is that the process of getting that deal closed is often handed off to the procurement team. And they don't particularly care about your timeline. They don't care if the deal closes by the end of the quarter. So you need to develop and use levers to create urgency. So one is to refer back to the business need, right? That you have, in all probability, defined some problems that are costing your prospect money every day that they continue. And so every day that this contract isn't signed, that's costing them money. Ideally, there's also some kind of compelling event that means that they've got to get that contract signed by a certain date. So for example, maybe they're going to announce this partnership at a quarterly kickoff meeting. Well, they've got to have the contract signed before they can do that. So let's all rally around that compelling event that means something to them. Relationships are also really important, right? You want to be sure that there's some executive level sponsor who really wants this deal to happen so that you can kind of remind procurement that this is about what their VP wants to get done. And so let's be sure that the VP gets what the VP wants. And then it's also useful sometimes to create some incentives, right? The procurement team during the commercial negotiation process may have asked for a discount. Well, one thing you can say is, hey, we're open to the discount, but in exchange, we need this contract done by the end of the quarter, right? So they have an incentive to make this happen. Now, with any given action item, there's a couple of techniques you should be using consistently to really drive the process forward. So one is whenever you're asking for something, set a target date. So if you're sharing a contract, don't just share the contract, ask them to get the comments back to you by a specific target date. And then you want to tie that target date to one of the urgency drivers that you've identified, right? The reason you need the contract back by that date is that getting the contract back by that date keeps us on track to hit their desired launch date, right? It's all about what they want. And then definitely use relationships where appropriate. So oftentimes your business stakeholders will kind of hand things off to procurement, and then they kind of want to disappear from all of the nitty gritty of getting them of kind of getting the deal closed. Well, at a minimum, keep them informed about where things stand, and when it's appropriate, ask them to check in to kind of create some additional urgency with the procurement team to kind of keep things moving. Now, there's a couple of other special topics to be aware of. So one of them is you want to be sure that you're using your contract, the seller's contract form, not the buyer's contract template. And the basic reason for this is that using the buyer's contract template is going to create a tremendous amount of delay because it's not designed for your product. And so you need to advocate for using your contract template. And one great argument here is that using the buyer's contract template is not going to save anyone time. And the reason for that is that your team is just going to have to insert your contract terms into their contract template, right? It's going to be your contract template, but just on their piece of paper. And so their legal team is still going to have to review all of your contract terms. It's just going to delay the process, and it's not going to save anybody any time. So there's really no point in kind of starting with the buyer's contract template. Now, another key point here is that you want to be sure that if the other side wants changes to the contract, that you are getting written red lines. And by that, what I mean is you need them to give you the exact language that would work for them, not kind of general comments. And the basic reason for this is that your legal team can't guess what would work for the other side. Like you need them to tell you exactly what would work and give you something specific. This is really important because sometimes the prospect will say, "Hey, can we have a call about the contract and talk about it? And can we ask some questions?" And it's fine to have that conversation, but you want to continuously stress that the action item is on them to supply written red lines with the exact language that would work for them, right? It's not going to be helpful for them to kind of make some observations and then expect you to get back to them, right? You can't guess what will work for the buyer. They've got to tell you what would work for them. Another tool that's really useful is to do an expert to expert call. And this is really useful if the kind of exchange of written comments isn't really working. And so an example of this would be, our legal team will talk directly to your legal team, or our security team will talk directly to your security team. And so when you're doing this, the key is the salesperson needs to stay involved, right? You as a salesperson, you need to prepare your expert, and you need to be there on that call. Right. And the salesperson opens up the call by reminding everyone of the purpose of the call, right? What are the issues that are still outstanding that we're going to work on? And the salesperson also needs to remind everyone of the urgency of resolving those issues. And then after that, they can turn it over to the experts to go ahead and get things resolved. These expert to expert calls are really useful for knotty issues that are tough because salespeople, we're not experts on some of these specialized issues. And if we're kind of a go-between, kind of bringing information back and forth, sometimes key points get lost in translation. So it's just better to have the experts talk directly, provided that they are properly prepared. So these are some great tips that will help you have an organized and efficient closing process. To take things forward and learn more about PSI selling, check out our website. And while you're there, you'll find resources on effective discovery, strategic negotiation, hiring, how to do structured demos, persuasive sales writing, and action focused onboarding. And with that, most importantly, as always, happy selling.